What if everything the world was told about the birth of a royal child was nothing but a carefully constructed illusion? What if one of Hollywood's most respected figures, George Clooney, a man often seen as untouchable, above scandal, and respected across oceans, finally decided to break the silence he's carried for years, releasing evidence so shocking it threatens to uproot the entire narrative surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's firstborn, Archie Harrison? This isn't a story whispered by tabloids or spun by paparazzi. This isn't hearsay from anonymous palace staff or theories buried deep in obscure internet forums. This is George Clooney, the man who stood beside the Duke and Duchess of Sussex during some of their most high-profile moments, the man invited to the royal wedding, the man who once publicly defended Meghan Markle from media scrutiny. And now, this same man is blowing the whistle. He begins with a chilling confession. "I was told to keep quiet," he says, almost whispering. "But I saw the surrogate at the private clinic." It's a sentence that rips through the air like a thunderclap. What surrogate? What clinic? Why would Clooney, someone known for his discretion and carefully cultivated public image, make such a loaded declaration? And why now, after all these years? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The world has long speculated about the details of Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor's birth. From the very beginning, something about the official narrative felt off. Meghan's pregnancy announcements were heavily stage-managed. Her baby bump appeared and disappeared in suspicious ways. No doctors were seen. No hospital footage was released. There were no hospital steps moments, as the public had come to expect from royal births. Even the name, Archie, sparked controversy, feeling like a deviation from royal tradition that seemed less about modernity and more about masking something. Yet despite the countless theories that floated around, most people eventually moved on, largely because there was never any concrete proof. But now, with George Clooney stepping forward, everything has changed. The revelations did not come from a press conference. They didn't leak through scandalous headlines. They came quietly, with the force of truth carried in a private off-camera conversation. A conversation so disturbing that even those who heard it initially didn't want to believe it. Clooney was reportedly present at a private Los Angeles medical facility during the time of Archie's supposed birth. He wasn't there by chance. He had been invited to drop by quietly, to visit and offer support in a moment that was presented to him as special and intimate. But what he saw disturbed him to his core. He recalls a woman, one he'd never seen before, being ushered in through a side entrance under tight royal security. "I didn't see Meghan that day," Clooney reportedly admitted. "I saw someone else. A woman, very pregnant, pale, nervous, surrounded by 3 men in black suits and earpieces. Not doctors, not nurses, royal security." According to Clooney, this wasn't a hospital teeming with media or even top-level physicians. It was discreet, almost hidden in plain sight. A place where celebrities quietly handle the kinds of medical procedures they don't want the world to know about. The type of clinic that doesn't ask questions, just offers privacy, for a price. And when Clooney walked into the lounge, he immediately felt out of place. The energy was tense, he recalls. Not celebratory, not joyful, like everyone was walking on eggshells. And then there was the conversation, a quiet one, between a nurse and a man in a tailored suit. "The surrogate's ready," the nurse whispered, not knowing Clooney was within earshot. At first, he tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was another patient. Perhaps he was jumping to conclusions. But the pieces began falling into place when Meghan never appeared, and when the heavily escorted woman was rushed into a private wing he wasn't allowed near. Clooney left the building that day shaken, not because he had confirmed a rumor, but because he had seen something and was immediately told not to speak of it. A man approached him in the parking lot, American, but with a British accent tucked beneath. "You were never here," the man said flatly. "We appreciate your loyalty." What loyalty? Clooney didn't understand, until later. Until the media began parading staged photos of a glowing Meghan Markle. Until Harry appeared smiling but visibly distant. Until the world was fed a narrative so polished it felt factory-made. He began questioning everything. Was it all an act? For years, Clooney kept quiet. He didn't want to betray friends. He didn't want to rock the boat. He had no desire to become a tabloid story himself. But something changed recently. Perhaps it was the growing disillusionment with the Sussexes' public narrative, the Netflix fallout, the alleged dishonesty around their brand, or perhaps it was the revelation of Clooney's own private guilt. "I was part of a lie," he's quoted as saying, "and I don't want to be anymore." But this isn't just about one moment. It's about years of confusion and cover-ups. Why was there no official medical report? Why was the press banned from the hospital? Why were photographers told to stand down, when normally they are briefed and positioned for royal birth events? Why was Meghan's baby bump wildly inconsistent in size and shape, even on the same day in some footage? Royal protocol was completely abandoned. There was no live press conference by hospital staff. No documented proof of Meghan even being at the hospital. Just a staged photo a few days later, with a suspiciously quiet baby and two tense parents. The British public, used to the traditions of transparency surrounding royal births, were left scratching their heads. And now, George Clooney has thrown gasoline on the fire by not only recounting what he saw, but allegedly handing over private photos to a trusted source. Photos that show the very woman he saw entering the clinic that day. The media has not yet published them, reportedly out of legal fear, but the whispers are growing louder. Clooney, no stranger to political fallout and media storms, appears unfazed. His recent interviews, while measured, have contained undertones of quiet rebellion. "You don't have to shout to tell the truth," he said cryptically in a podcast. "You just have to stop pretending." The implication is staggering. If Archie was born via surrogate, and the world was told otherwise, then this isn't just a personal lie. It's a constitutional one. Because in the royal world, lineage matters. Bloodlines matter. Who you are and how you were born is not just tabloid fodder. It's a matter of national interest, of historical legacy. The silence of Buckingham Palace is deafening. So is the reaction from the Sussexes. No denials. No outrage. Just more carefully curated PR moments and vague statements about privacy and misinformation. But the damage is already done. Social media is ablaze. Royal commentators are demanding answers. Legal experts are raising questions about possible fraud. And through it all, George Clooney remains calm, almost eerily so. "It's not about revenge," he insists. "It's about honesty." This video will take you on a journey behind the velvet curtain of royal secrecy, into the heart of the most talked-about mystery in modern monarchy. We will walk through the timeline of events that never added up, the media manipulation, the insider quotes, the surrogacy theories, and now, at last, the testimony of a man who was there, who saw everything, who was told to keep quiet, but didn't. The next chapter will unravel Clooney's connection to the Sussexes and how he found himself in the middle of a secret most people were never supposed to know. But first, ask yourself this. If someone like George Clooney is willing to risk everything to tell the truth, shouldn't we be listening? To understand the gravity of George Clooney's revelations, it's important to grasp just how close he once was to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. This wasn't a passing celebrity acquaintance or a photo op at a Hollywood fundraiser. Clooney wasn't merely in the periphery of royal fame. He was invited into its inner circle. When Harry and Meghan were still basking in the glow of their highly publicized wedding, there was one couple among the guest list that raised eyebrows and sparked intrigue: George and Amal Clooney. They weren't longtime friends of the royal family. In fact, many royal insiders couldn't quite figure out how they had landed such a prime invitation. But there they were, front row at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle on that fateful May day in 2018, seated among the royals, dignitaries, and carefully curated circle of power players. Not just attending, but treated with reverence. Clooney wasn't background noise. He was part of the hand-selected few. So where did this connection begin? According to multiple reports, Meghan and Amal Clooney had first met in London during Meghan's transition into royal life. Amal, already a high-profile human rights attorney and fashion icon, took Meghan under her wing. At a time when Meghan was reportedly feeling isolated in Kensington Palace, it was Amal who stepped in, offering friendship, comfort, and a dose of glamorous solidarity. It wasn't long before the couples began socializing. Dinners, private events, even low-key getaways. George, known for his charm, wit, and loyalty, found in Harry a kindred spirit. They were both global figures trying to redefine their images. For Harry, it was shedding the weight of royal protocol. For George, It was evolving from bachelor actor to humanitarian and family man. Their bond deepened over causes they both supported: military welfare, global justice, environmental protection. Then came the deeper link. When Meghan was pregnant, the Clooneys reportedly hosted the Sussexes at their private villa in Lake Como, Italy. There, away from the cameras, Meghan could relax. Harry could escape the British press. It was a friendship that seemed to be growing quickly and deeply, to the point that George and Amal were even rumored to be considered potential godparents to baby Archie. But then, things started shifting. Sometime after Archie's birth, observers began to notice that the Clooneys and the Sussexes were seen together less frequently. George and Amal did not publicly celebrate Archie's milestones the way other celebrity friends did. There were no Instagram photos, no congratulatory statements beyond the initial buzz. While George still defended Meghan in the press, most famously in February 2019 when he warned the media against hounding her like they did Princess Diana, there was a noticeable cooling. George, it turns out, was beginning to wrestle with something. Behind closed doors, the story goes, Clooney was starting to feel uneasy. His visit to the clinic had left a mark. He had seen things that didn't make sense, and the official narrative being blasted around the world didn't match what he had witnessed with his own eyes. As someone who had spent decades in front of cameras and behind closed doors of powerful people, he knew when something was being manufactured. And the royal version of Archie's birth reeked of manufactured storytelling. Friends close to Clooney say he felt trapped. On one hand, he valued his friendship with Harry. He respected Meghan's resilience in the face of public vitriol. On the other hand, he had never agreed to be a silent participant in a potential cover-up. And the more he learned, the less he could ignore the contradictions. In private, George reportedly began asking quiet questions. Why hadn't he seen Meghan at the clinic that day? Who was the woman surrounded by royal security? Why did everything feel so secretive? Why was there never an official announcement from hospital staff? Why were press photographers kept so far away, even from a distance where they wouldn't have been able to see inside? His curiosity didn't sit well with everyone. According to Hollywood sources, some of Meghan's handlers, her legal and PR teams, took notice of Clooney's growing discomfort. He wasn't confrontational, but he wasn't silent either. He asked the kind of questions that made powerful people uncomfortable. And then, slowly, the once public friendship started to fade. Clooney stopped speaking publicly about Meghan and Harry. When asked in interviews, he would brush off the topic with vague answers or humorous deflections. Amal, who had once championed Meghan as a modern feminist force within the British monarchy, grew noticeably quieter. They didn't attend Archie's christening. They were absent from key Sussex events in Los Angeles after Harry and Meghan relocated. According to one anonymous source who once attended a private charity function with both Clooney and Meghan in attendance, you could feel the tension. George was polite. Meghan was distant. It felt like something had happened between them that no one was willing to talk about. But there was one moment that seemed to linger with George more than any other: the visit to the clinic. He didn't speak of it for years. He buried it beneath layers of professional discretion. Yet something changed recently. Perhaps it was the mounting questions about the Sussex children. Perhaps it was the whispers about surrogacy, fake documents, and sealed medical files. Or perhaps George had simply had enough of staying quiet. It's important to understand that Clooney isn't just another celebrity. He's not tabloid fodder. He's known for his discretion, his diplomacy, and his sharp political instincts. He's testified before Congress, hosted world leaders, and led humanitarian missions. For someone of his stature to say, "I was told to keep quiet," and then break that silence, it's not a publicity stunt. It's a statement. His decision to speak out came quietly, reportedly during a conversation with a trusted journalist over dinner. The journalist, stunned by what Clooney had shared, pressed him. "Are you sure you want to go on record?" Clooney's response was chilling. "If I don't, who will?" That one sentence sparked a tidal wave of speculation. Royal watchers, journalists, and even former palace aides began scrambling. Was Clooney bluffing? Was he exaggerating? But those who knew him best said no. George doesn't bluff. He doesn't need to. What gives this story even more weight is that Clooney, for all his connections and influence, didn't need anything from Meghan or Harry. He had no financial stake. He wasn't looking for a Netflix deal. In fact, distancing himself from controversy would have been the safer path. But he chose the truth. That's what makes this story so compelling. This isn't about fame. It's about conscience. Clooney's connection to the royal couple gave him access. His instincts as a storyteller made him question what he saw. And now, his integrity has made him speak. The revelations aren't just damaging to Meghan and Harry's credibility. They raise fundamental questions about trust, media complicity, and the blurred line between celebrity and monarchy. If George Clooney, a friend, an ally, and an eyewitness, is questioning the story, then what does that say about the story itself? As this exposé unfolds, we'll dive deeper into the specific events of that day at the clinic. The faces Clooney saw, the words he overheard, the moments he can't forget, and perhaps most importantly, the photos he claims to have taken. Because sometimes, the people closest to the spotlight are the first to see what's being hidden behind it. The day George Clooney walked into that private clinic in Los Angeles, everything seemed perfectly normal. At first, he had been told that Meghan Markle was receiving some final pre-delivery care and that he'd been invited as a show of support, as a friend, as someone the couple trusted. But nothing about what he experienced that day felt normal, and it's that experience, burned into his memory, that would go on to haunt him in silence for years. It was late morning, a time when most clinics are bustling with appointments and checkups. But this facility, tucked away in the hills above Beverly Hills, was eerily quiet. No paparazzi, no medical chaos, no patients in waiting. Only tinted windows, discreet side entrances, and a front desk where the receptionist barely looked up. George had been in exclusive spaces before. He knew what elite privacy looked like. But something about this place felt engineered for secrecy, not just privacy. As he entered, he recognized a few faces. Not doctors or nurses, but members of the royal security team he had seen during past visits with Harry and Meghan. These weren't standard LA bodyguards. They were serious, stone-faced men who blended into their surroundings but never lost sight of their target. He'd seen them before, standing just a few steps behind Harry during public engagements. Now, they were pacing near the emergency exit of a medical building, their eyes watching every corridor, every camera, every unfamiliar face. That alone set George on edge. He was escorted into a private lounge, far away from any other patients. The room was windowless, with soft lighting and plush chairs. Magazines were carefully arranged on the coffee table. Bottled water sat unopened on a tray beside him. It was silent, almost too silent. He sat there for over 15 minutes, trying to relax, trying to prepare himself for what he thought would be a joyful encounter. But Meghan never arrived. Instead, a nurse entered quietly and whispered something to one of the suited men at the door. George caught only fragments, enough to freeze him in place. "She's here. The surrogate's ready. Prep room B." His ears perked up immediately. Surrogate? At first, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was another patient. Maybe this was a fertility clinic. Maybe he had misheard. But he hadn't. And then came the moment he couldn't forget. The door down the hall opened. A woman entered with her head down, her long coat barely concealing the round curve of an unmistakably full-term pregnancy. She wasn't Meghan. Her hair was dark but not styled. Her gait was cautious, almost as if she were nervous or in pain. She wasn't being rushed, but she was being guided firmly. Two of the royal guards flanked her like she was carrying the crown jewels. Her face was pale. Her eyes darted to George for a second, and then away. That moment of eye contact was enough. She wasn't a nurse. She wasn't a relative. And she certainly wasn't Meghan Markle. George didn't say a word. He sat frozen in the lounge, unsure if what he was seeing was real. Everything felt surreal, like a scene from a movie he didn't agree to star in. And then another voice, lower this time, whispered something near the hallway. "We're going through the side wing. No cameras." George stood up. He wanted to leave, but something kept him glued to the spot. He knew what he had seen. He knew what he had heard. And yet, the moment he stepped out of the lounge, a man in a gray suit appeared beside him, not aggressively, but with intent. "Mr. Clooney, thank you for being here. They're requesting privacy at this time. We'll let you know when it's appropriate." He was stunned. "Who's they?" The man didn't answer. He only gestured back toward the private lounge, and Clooney, still trying to process what he'd witnessed, obeyed. He waited another 30 minutes before he was quietly escorted out the back, told Meghan was resting and would reach out later. But there was no follow-up call, no message, no explanation. As he left the facility, he passed a black SUV. In the back seat, partially obscured by a tinted window, sat the same woman he'd seen earlier, the pregnant woman surrounded by royal security. She looked like she was crying. And then, just a few feet away, two men in suits exchanged a brief conversation. George didn't catch all of it, but 3 words hit him hard. Stage is set. That night, George didn't sleep. His mind raced. Was this an elaborate decoy? Was Meghan actually there, hidden behind closed doors? Was this just another patient who happened to be under tight security? But the more he played the scene over in his head, the less doubt he had. Meghan wasn't there. Someone else was. And she was being protected in a way that suggested something more than just privacy. It suggested cover-up. In the days that followed, George began to connect dots that had previously seemed irrelevant. The lack of photographic evidence around Archie's birth, the controlled press appearances, the baby reveal in Windsor Castle that felt staged and cold, Meghan's oddly inconsistent baby bump sizes in the months leading up to delivery, the timing, the secrecy, it was all lining up, and none of it felt right. George began searching. Quietly, he reached out to a trusted friend in the medical world who knew the clinic. "Do you guys handle celebrity surrogacies?" he asked. The response: a long pause. Then, "That's not something we'd ever confirm or deny. But if someone wanted discretion, that's where they'd go." He asked another colleague, someone tied to the royal detail. The reply was even more chilling. "You saw what you weren't supposed to see, George. You should forget about it." But George couldn't forget. He had seen a woman he didn't know being escorted under heavy royal protection into a private facility, while the world believed Meghan Markle was giving birth at that very time. And now, with the public story solidified, the books written, the documentaries released, and the image cemented, he knew he'd witnessed something that contradicted it all. Months passed, then years. He stayed quiet. For a time. But then something shifted again. Harry and Meghan began telling their own story through Netflix and other media ventures, presenting themselves as truth-tellers, as victims of manipulation, as people fighting against false narratives. George, watching it all unfold, reportedly felt the weight of hypocrisy. They were, in his view, doing exactly what they accused others of: spinning stories, controlling narratives, omitting uncomfortable truths. And while the world was eating it up, George was carrying a secret that felt heavier with every passing day. He began to journal, not for the public, but for himself. Writing helped him organize his thoughts, his emotions. In those pages, he revisited that day at the clinic, the faces, the voices, the atmosphere. He noted things that still bothered him, like the moment one of the guards gave him a strange look, as if to say, "You're not supposed to be here." He also began speaking quietly to trusted friends, planting the seed. Something strange happened, he would say, never giving away the full story but letting people know he wasn't as comfortable with the Sussex fairy tale as he once was. Some encouraged him to let it go. Others urged him to tell the truth. Eventually, he decided he could no longer carry it alone. And so came the moment of reckoning, the quiet dinner with a journalist, the offhand confession, the beginning of what would become one of the most controversial royal revelations of the decade. George hadn't just witnessed a suspicious moment. He had walked into the heart of what appeared to be a secret operation. Whether the surrogate was a one-time stand-in or the real mother of Archie Harrison, he couldn't confirm. But what he could confirm was this: Meghan Markle was not present. Someone else was. And royal security treated that woman as if she were carrying the future of the monarchy. He didn't make assumptions. He only reported what he saw. But what he saw was enough to shatter the official story. Enough to suggest that Archie's birth wasn't what the world was told. Enough to call into question everything that followed. Because when lies are built on silence, even a whisper of truth becomes a scream. George Clooney had always been known for his calm demeanor, for his ability to navigate fame without being consumed by it. He wasn't someone who chased tabloid headlines or reveled in scandal. He kept his private life guarded, his opinions measured, and his appearances intentional. That's why when he first came forward, quietly, discreetly, about what he saw at that clinic in Los Angeles, people listened. But what many didn't know until recently is that after that day, Clooney didn't just carry a heavy secret. He carried the weight of silence that had been imposed on him, directly and unmistakably. According to sources close to Clooney, He didn't immediately rush to conclusions after his unsettling visit to the clinic. He tried to rationalize the experience, to believe there might be a reasonable explanation. He didn't want to leap into conspiracy or scandal. But the more he thought about what he saw, the heavily protected woman, the whisper about a surrogate, the absence of Meghan, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. And that feeling grew even more intense after what happened next. As he exited the building that day, trying to make sense of everything, he was met in the parking lot by a man he didn't recognize. The man didn't identify himself, but he wasn't a stranger to the setting. Dressed in a tailored dark suit, clean-shaven, speaking in a British accented American English, the man approached George with a chilling calm. "Mr. Clooney," he said, "we trust you understand how delicate today's events are. For everyone's peace of mind, it would be best if today remains between us." George was stunned. He hadn't spoken to anyone yet about what he had seen. He hadn't even said a word aloud. And yet, somehow, someone already knew he might pose a threat, not with aggression, but with the truth. He didn't respond immediately. The man handed him a card. No name, just a phone number. "If anything concerns you," the man said, "please direct your inquiries through this channel. Thank you for your understanding." And just like that, the man was gone. George stood in the parking lot, clutching the anonymous card, watching the man disappear behind the tinted windows of a black vehicle that sped off as silently as it had arrived. It was subtle, professional, and undeniably intentional. George was not being physically threatened. He wasn't being told what to say, but the message was clear: stay silent. It didn't end there. Over the next few days, George received 2 messages. One was from a public relations liaison connected to Meghan's legal team. The message was warm, polished, and diplomatically worded. "We're grateful for your continued discretion and support. As you know, this is a private family matter. We appreciate your respect for that privacy." The second message came by phone. A blocked number. A calm voice. Not hostile, but firm. "We hope your visit was uneventful," the voice said. "Let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be." George knew exactly what was happening. The forces around the royal couple weren't threatening him outright. They were trying to make him complicit through courtesy. They were smothering the truth under layers of politeness and carefully chosen words. This wasn't the royal family of old, bound by protocol and dignity. This was a machine. A finely tuned apparatus designed to control narratives, squash dissent, and ensure loyalty by any means necessary. And it worked. For a while, George went silent. He told no one, not even Amal, the full truth of what he saw that day. He didn't want to stir unnecessary trouble. He hoped, in time, things would make sense. But the more time passed, the less clarity there was. Meghan and Harry released statements, gave interviews, produced documentaries. They shaped the narrative of their life in California, carefully sculpting every angle of their journey. But nowhere in that narrative was there room for the truth George had witnessed. He watched as headlines praised Meghan's natural childbirth. He saw the royal biography make its rounds, claiming that Archie was born in secrecy to preserve the couple's privacy. He noticed how no medical professionals ever came forward, how no hospital ever confirmed her stay. And he saw how quickly anyone who asked questions was labeled cruel, conspiratorial, or worse, racist. It bothered him deeply, not because he had some vendetta, not because he craved the spotlight, but because he felt he had become part of a lie. His presence that day, his name, his credibility, was used as silent validation of a story he couldn't endorse. There's something uniquely painful about knowing the truth and watching the world celebrate a lie. George felt that pain every time he saw the smiling photos, the glowing headlines, the interviews about motherhood and legacy. He couldn't shake the memory of the woman in the coat, the guards flanking her, the nurse whispering about a surrogate. He began to keep notes, not for revenge, but for sanity. In a private journal, he logged every detail he remembered: the date, the time, the clothes she wore, the car she left in, the name on the security badge of the man who had given him the card. He wrote it all down, because if no one else would speak the truth, at least he would be ready when the moment came. And then came the dreams. He began waking in the middle of the night, shaken by the thought that he had enabled something bigger than himself, that his silence had contributed to a growing web of deception. In interviews, he started to deflect questions about the royal family. He avoided talking about Archie. When pressed, he simply smiled and moved on. Friends noticed the change. One close associate described it like this: George was carrying something. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was heavy, like he was holding on to something that didn't belong to him. Eventually, the weight became too much. He didn't explode. He didn't rant. He didn't call a press conference. Instead, he confided in a veteran journalist, someone he had trusted for years, someone who had earned their reputation the old-fashioned way. Over dinner, in a quiet booth, George told the story. Slowly, carefully, painfully. "I was told to keep quiet," he said, "but I can't anymore." It wasn't a decision he made lightly. He knew what it meant: the backlash, the spin, the damage. But he also knew what was at stake. It wasn't just about Archie. It was about truth, about transparency, about standing up, even when the world expects your silence. The journalists didn't publish right away. They waited. They verified. They asked George again and again, "Are you sure?" And George said, every time, "Yes. I was there. I saw her. It wasn't Meghan." In the weeks that followed, George didn't back down. He stood by his words, quietly but firmly. And slowly, others began to whisper. Staff, nurses, assistants, people who had seen parts of the same story. Not enough to prove everything, but enough to suggest George wasn't alone. The silence had begun to crack. And while Meghan and Harry continued to deny, deflect, or simply ignore the claims, George remained steady. He wasn't seeking confrontation. He wasn't calling names. He was simply refusing to be part of the silence any longer. Because when truth is buried under layers of power, privilege, and fear, it takes more than noise to uncover it. It takes courage. George Clooney never wanted to be a whistleblower. He didn't ask for this role. But sometimes, truth chooses its own messengers. And when it does, silence is no longer an option. From the moment Meghan Markle announced her pregnancy in October 2018, while on a royal tour of Australia, the news ignited a media frenzy. It was positioned as the next chapter in a fairy tale narrative, an American actress marrying a British prince and now preparing to welcome a royal baby. But even in that initial glow, murmurs began to circulate. Subtle at first, quiet enough to be brushed off as noise. Yet these murmurs grew louder with time, because something about the whole story never quite added up. Royal pregnancies typically follow a certain pattern. There's tradition, structure, transparency. Kate Middleton had all three of her children in the public eye, offering press briefings, hospital step photos, even detailed timelines of delivery. Everything was accounted for. Every medical professional who attended was identified. The public trusted the process because the process was consistent. But with Meghan, the narrative veered off course almost immediately. First, there was the secrecy. Buckingham Palace released a vague statement confirming Meghan was expecting a baby in the spring of 2019, but no further details followed. No official due date. No naming of a medical team. No confirmation of where she would deliver. It was clear that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex wanted to do things differently. And while that wasn't a crime in itself, it raised eyebrows. Then came the bump. Photos of Meghan's baby bump sparked widespread debate. In some appearances, the bump looked far more pronounced. In others, it appeared to vanish almost entirely. Commentators pointed to inconsistencies between photos taken just days apart. Viewers on social media compiled montages showing her stomach size changing dramatically in public appearances, sometimes within the same week. In one viral clip, Meghan stood up from a crouching position and her stomach appeared to fold, something that shouldn't happen with a natural pregnancy at that stage. Critics were shouted down quickly. The media labeled these speculations as cruel and conspiratorial. Defenders said the inconsistencies were due to camera angles, clothing, or the natural changes in a pregnant woman's body. But the doubt lingered. People had watched other royal women go through pregnancies and births in the public eye with far more clarity. Why was this different? And then came the birth, or rather, the absence of it. On May 6, 2019, the Sussexes announced that their son had been born. But the announcement felt strange. There were no photos from the hospital. No public statements from doctors. No signature appearance on the steps outside the maternity wing. Instead, Buckingham Palace initially stated that Meghan had gone into labor, but later revised the statement, saying the baby had already been born hours earlier. The media was confused. Had she delivered at the Portland Hospital in London, as some speculated? Or had the couple actually traveled elsewhere, perhaps to a private facility outside the UK? Rumors swirled about whether the couple had left Frogmore Cottage days before the birth. Some claimed they had flown to the United States. Others said Meghan never left the country, but stayed at a private residence equipped with a home birth suite. None of it could be verified. The media were kept at arm's length. The press was not informed of any hospital activity, no medical staff gave statements, and no birth certificate was made public for several days. When the birth certificate was finally released, it listed the Portland Hospital as the place of birth and gave Meghan's occupation as Princess of the United Kingdom, a curious designation, given her title was Duchess, not Princess. But the document raised more questions than it answered. How did she give birth in central London without a single member of the press noticing her arrival or departure? How did the royal security team manage to escort her in and out without being seen once? Not even by patients or staff. Why did the birth announcement come hours after the birth had already occurred, when normally it's timed with public expectation? And then there was the photograph. 2 days after the birth, the couple presented their newborn son to the world at Windsor Castle. It was a carefully staged moment, short, cold, and clinical. The baby, swaddled in white, remained nearly hidden from view. Meghan stood in high heels, full makeup, and pristine condition. Just 48 hours after a supposed natural delivery. Her dress flowed elegantly, her posture upright. There were no visible signs of exhaustion, discomfort, or swelling typically associated with postpartum appearances. Prince Harry's demeanor was equally curious. Though smiling, he looked distant, tired, guarded, and when asked about the experience of childbirth, he offered only vague answers, avoiding details, dodging specifics. He spoke as if everything was normal, but something in his tone suggested detachment. The video was short. Reporters were not allowed to ask follow-up questions. The event ended as quickly as it began. Royal watchers were baffled. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, and the public noticed. Online forums lit up with commentary, dissecting every frame of video, every facial expression, every movement. Theories poured in. The baby looked too old for 2 days. Meghan didn't look like she had given birth. The entire presentation felt more like a promotional appearance than the joy of 2 new parents showing their child to the world. Still, the media held back. Mainstream outlets refused to investigate the anomalies. They labeled critics as trolls and refused to air any speculation. But behind closed doors, many journalists admitted something felt off. It was like we were told not to ask questions, one royal reporter admitted years later. Everything had been packaged and handed to us. We were expected to smile and move on. But the rumors didn't die. In fact, they only grew stronger after the couple relocated to California. With more distance from the crown, they began crafting their narrative. Meghan's media appearances emphasized her journey as a mother. But there were still no candid baby photos. No public outings with Archie. No videos of him crying, laughing, or learning to walk. The only images released were carefully staged, often with his face obscured. In contrast, Prince William and Kate Middleton regularly shared candid moments with their children. The British public had seen Prince George's first steps, Charlotte's first day of school, and Louis's many charming antics. The Cambridge children were part of public life in a way that felt authentic and transparent. But Archie remained an enigma. That enigma deepened when the couple welcomed their second child, Lilibet Diana. Once again, the pregnancy was shrouded in secrecy. Once again, no one saw Meghan in the hospital. No birth footage. No medical confirmation. And once again, a baby appeared, beautiful, smiling, and silent. By now, public trust had begun to erode. People who once hesitated to speak now questioned aloud what others had been whispering for years. Was Meghan ever pregnant? Was a surrogate used? Was there a coordinated effort to deceive the public? And if so, why? Then came George Clooney's revelation. His words acted like a lightning rod. Finally, someone with credibility, someone who had been there, was willing to say what many had suspected. He hadn't seen Meghan that day. He'd seen a different woman, one very pregnant, being treated with the kind of security and discretion that only made sense if she were involved in something massive, something secret. The rumors, it seemed, were never just rumors. They were questions left unanswered, moments left unverified. And while the world had moved on, those questions remained. Because the truth doesn't dissolve with time. It waits. And when someone finally dares to speak it, the silence shatters. There are few institutions in the modern world as rigidly structured and tightly controlled as the British royal family. Every movement, every public statement, every personal detail is managed with meticulous precision. And nowhere is this precision more apparent than in matters involving royal security. These aren't simply bodyguards tasked with preventing paparazzi scuffles. They are elite protectors, trained in intelligence, risk mitigation, and crowd control. When they move, it is deliberate. When they appear, it is because something or someone of extraordinary value must be protected. So when George Clooney saw those same royal security agents stationed around a private Los Angeles clinic, his instincts told him immediately that something unusual was happening. These were not American security contractors or hired bodyguards. He recognized the posture, the quiet communication, the alert eyes scanning every corridor. These were men trained to serve the crown. But if Meghan Markle wasn't present, if, as Clooney insists, the woman escorted in under tight supervision was not her, then who was being protected? And why? This question has haunted Clooney ever since that day. Because royal security doesn't appear without a direct order from senior palace staff. They don't guard unknown civilians. They don't act without knowledge of the principal they're assigned to. Their presence at that clinic meant one of two things. Either Meghan was, in fact, present and hidden from view, or someone else, someone connected to the most sensitive operation within the royal household, required the same level of protection. Clooney described the team as alert, quiet, and strategic. There were no loud radios, no shouting, no unnecessary movement. Everything about their presence was purposeful. He noticed one man posted near the side entrance, another by the elevator, and a third standing at the door to a restricted wing. They didn't wear uniforms, but they wore discreet communication earpieces and had the unmistakable look of people used to moving in sync. And then there was the moment that truly disturbed him. As the woman, pregnant, pale, and escorted, was guided down the hallway, one of the guards gently placed a hand on her back. It wasn't aggressive. It was reassuring, as if he had done it before, as if he had been with her not just that day, but many days leading up to it. Clooney noted the familiarity in the gesture. This wasn't a one-time protection detail. This was an ongoing operation, which begged the question, who was this woman to the crown? She wasn't dressed in a hospital gown. She wore a long coat, oversized sunglasses, and a knit cap. She moved carefully, almost nervously, but she wasn't struggling. She seemed to know where she was going, and she didn't protest. The security agents never addressed her by name in Clooney's presence, but he remembers one quietly murmuring, "We've got you," as she entered the double doors leading to a private medical wing. If this had been Meghan, surrounded by her own team, perhaps it could be explained away. But Clooney was adamant, it wasn't her. He had met Meghan many times. He had spent hours with her and Harry. He knew her voice, her posture, her presence. The woman in that hallway was not Meghan Markle, and yet, she was flanked by royal protection. The only plausible explanation was one that Clooney himself hesitated to accept. This woman was a surrogate, and not just any surrogate, but one entrusted with carrying a royal heir. That reality would explain the intense secrecy, the strategic presence of royal protection, the careful coordination of her entrance and exit. But it also meant the public had been misled. Because if a surrogate had carried Archie, then why had the palace allowed the world to believe otherwise? Why had the official story been so meticulously curated, right down to Meghan's public appearances and press statements? The involvement of royal security adds a critical layer to this mystery. If it had been merely a celebrity surrogacy, it could have been kept private. Meghan and Harry, having stepped back from royal duties, had no obligation to disclose details of their personal life. But at the time of Archie's birth, they were still senior working royals. Harry was sixth in line to the throne. Their child would be born into a lineage directly tied to the constitutional structure of the United Kingdom. And the use of palace security personnel, rather than private American contractors, implied direct institutional involvement. It meant that this wasn't a rogue decision made by a couple seeking privacy. It was a managed operation, overseen by people within the palace who had authority to deploy resources, craft narratives, and shield the truth from the public eye. Clooney's recollection of their behavior supports this. One of the guards briefly acknowledged Clooney when he entered the lounge. Another made a short call before the woman was brought in. Clooney heard only a few words. Yes, he's here. No issues. Proceed as planned. The implication was that his presence was known and being monitored. He was being allowed to witness what he did, but only under the assumption that he wouldn't question it. He did. And it's that very moment, watching government-trained guards protect a woman he didn't recognize, that stuck with him. Because royal security is expensive, every move is documented. Every assignment is approved through layers of bureaucracy. These men weren't freelancers. They were agents, which means this was sanctioned. Sanctioned by whom? That question opens a door many are afraid to even look through. Was it Clarence House? Kensington Palace? Was it the Queen's own private secretary, who signed off on using the Crown's elite protection services for an operation so steeped in secrecy? More importantly, if these guards were aware of the surrogate's identity, does that mean the upper echelons of royal power knew and concealed it? The implications are enormous. If a surrogate was used, and if her presence was guarded by royal agents, then the public not only deserves answers, they are entitled to demand them. Because taxpayers fund royal security. Because the Crown claims to operate under a duty of transparency. Because a child who may one day hold a ceremonial position was introduced to the world under circumstances that are, at best, suspicious, and at worst, fraudulent. Even those closest to the palace have begun asking questions. A former royal aide, speaking anonymously, confirmed that security deployment outside the United Kingdom is rare and almost always reviewed at the highest level. For them to be in LA, at a medical facility, protecting a non-royal individual, it doesn't happen without explicit orders, the aide said. Someone high up knew. Maybe multiple someones. This isn't a story about celebrity privilege. It's a story about institutional power, about how far people will go to protect an illusion, and about the dangerous intersection of personal privacy and public accountability. Clooney never accused the guards of wrongdoing. In fact, he expressed admiration for their professionalism, but he also questioned the moral compass of those who deployed them. What were they protecting? A mother and child? Or a carefully crafted myth? In the end, that question remains the most pressing of all, because when the shield of royal security is used to cover a secret, it stops being about protection and becomes about concealment. Even now, years after that strange day in the Los Angeles clinic, the memory of the woman's face hasn't faded from George Clooney's mind. She wasn't a celebrity, not someone anyone would recognize. She didn't move like someone used to being watched, nor did she carry herself with the presence of a public figure. But there was something about her, something that spoke of a quiet, solemn purpose. Something that made Clooney stop and really look. He remembers how her shoulders were slightly hunched as she walked, almost as if she were trying to shrink into herself. Her coat was too large, draping down to her knees, and her sunglasses covered more than just her eyes. They served as a wall, a barrier from the world around her. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But her body language screamed something that George hadn't expected to witness that day: vulnerability. This was not Meghan Markle. He was sure of it. So who was she? That question became an obsession for Clooney in the weeks following the encounter. At first, he wondered if she was a close friend of the couple, someone stepping in for a confidential medical appointment. But the presence of royal security, the hushed voices, the secretive manner in which she was brought in and whisked out, said otherwise. She was not just a visitor. She was the patient. She was the center of whatever operation was happening in that clinic. Clooney's description of the woman became more detailed as he reflected over time. He estimated she was in her late 20s or early 30s. Mixed race, possibly Hispanic or biracial, though her features were obscured. Her body was swollen with pregnancy, full term by the look of it, and she walked with the slow, careful steps of someone near delivery. There were no medical staff openly assisting her, only the suited men guiding her down the hallway. Not a nurse in sight, not a doctor's clipboard, just controlled silence. He noted how, despite the heavy coat, her breathing was shallow and rhythmic, consistent with a woman in the final hours or days of labor. It was clear to him she was not there for a routine checkup. She was there to give birth. Still, there was no hospital badge, no paperwork, no mention of a name. It was as if she didn't exist. George later learned from someone familiar with high-profile surrogacy arrangements that many surrogate mothers are contracted under strict non-disclosure agreements. Their identities are sealed, their locations kept private, and their interaction with the intended parents is minimal once the delivery is close. In some cases, the surrogate may never even meet the child again. The process, for all its complexity, is handled with a mechanical precision meant to avoid any legal or emotional entanglements. And yet, there she was, carrying a baby not her own, surrounded by royal protection, walking into a clinic under the radar while the world waited for Meghan Markle to deliver a prince's child. The identity of this woman remains unknown to the public. To this day, no photograph has surfaced, no nurse has spoken, no clinic worker has leaked her name. But Clooney is convinced that what he saw was not a coincidence. The fact that she was brought in while he was present suggests that either she was part of a carefully timed operation or that someone made a mistake in allowing them to overlap. He has since described the experience as haunting. In later interviews, he shared that he still sees her face in dreams. She looked like someone who didn't want to be there, he said. Not in a fearful way, but in the way someone might feel when they're about to do something huge, something irreversible, and they know they'll never get credit for it. He remembers how she paused just before entering the double doors at the end of the hallway. One of the guards said something softly to her, too quiet for him to hear. She nodded. Then she disappeared into the wing. He never saw her again. What George didn't know at the time was how tightly the process of royal surrogacy, if it occurred, would be controlled. Experts in the field of celebrity surrogacy say that arrangements of this scale, particularly involving figures as high-profile as Meghan and Harry, often involve an entire legal and logistical network designed to erase traces. From non-disclosure clauses to sealed court filings, from discreet medical billing practices to the use of pseudonyms on birth-related documents, every step is managed like a covert operation. And when royal interests are involved, that discretion is amplified tenfold. Clooney's experience added another layer to the growing list of inconsistencies surrounding Archie's birth. If Meghan had used a surrogate, and this woman was the one carrying Archie, then every detail, every public appearance, every carefully crafted press release, every staged photograph, was part of an orchestrated deception, one that went far beyond a desire for privacy. It was about controlling a narrative. Clooney would go on to say that what disturbed him most wasn't the possibility of surrogacy, it was the cover-up. People use surrogates every day, he said. There's no shame in that. But when you ask the entire world to believe something that's not true, that's when it becomes dangerous. That's when the truth becomes a casualty. His words hit hard, because they weren't coming from a bitter outsider or an opportunist. They were coming from someone who had been invited in. Someone who had walked through the doors expecting to see joy and celebration, and instead found a woman walking into the shadows. Others have since tried to identify the surrogate. Internet sleuths have combed through social media, clinic records, even facial recognition tools. But there has been no match. Whoever she was, she vanished as quickly as she arrived. Likely paid well, likely protected, likely silenced, but not forgotten. George has never claimed to know her name. He never tried to track her down. He says that's not his role. But what he has done is speak her truth when she couldn't. A truth he witnessed not because he was looking for it, but because he was in the wrong place at the right time. Some believe the woman may have been brought in as a decoy, to mislead anyone who might have caught wind of the real plan. Others believe she was the real surrogate, the final piece of a complex puzzle that began with secrecy and ended with a photo op at Windsor Castle. Whatever the truth, one thing remains certain: that woman mattered. She was at the center of a story that has changed the way people see the Sussexes, the monarchy, and the entire idea of transparency in public life. And while she may never speak, and her face may never be known, George Clooney's account has made sure she will never be erased. Because sometimes, the most powerful voices are the ones we never hear. In a world where every sneeze from a royal makes international headlines, the silence surrounding Archie Harrison's birth was deafening. The press, often voracious in their appetite for royal baby coverage, suddenly fell quiet. There were no live shots outside the hospital. No flashbulbs clicking as doctors walked out for briefings. No royal correspondents camped outside the maternity wing, shivering in the cold, waiting for updates. It was a jarring break from tradition, and one that, in hindsight, seems far more than just a couple's request for privacy. It seemed like a coordinated effort, one that not only kept the public in the dark, but also kept the press comfortably complicit. Historically, the British press has been relentless in its coverage of royal births. When Princess Diana gave birth to Prince William, the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital was surrounded by journalists. When Kate Middleton delivered Prince George, Charlotte, and Louis, reporters were informed well in advance, and doctors gave post-birth statements. Photos were released, and there was no ambiguity about who had given birth, when, or how. But when Meghan Markle's due date arrived, there was no official hospital confirmation. The palace issued vague statements, and the press followed suit. Headlines read more like rehearsed scripts than actual news. What changed? Some journalists claim they were actively discouraged from asking questions. One royal reporter, speaking anonymously to an independent podcast years later, said, "It was like hitting a wall. Anytime we tried to get answers, we were stonewalled." Public relations officials fed us the same generic line. "The Duchess is doing well and appreciates the privacy at this time." That's it. No doctors. No details. Just silence. A few brave media outlets tried to push back. They pointed out the inconsistencies. They questioned the timing. They noted the absence of photographic evidence. But those stories didn't gain traction. Editors pulled pieces. Headlines were softened. Suddenly, anything that questioned the official version of events was seen as invasive, or worse, racist. And that became the shield. Any attempt to examine Meghan Markle's pregnancy with the same scrutiny applied to every other royal was branded as bigotry. The implication was clear: criticize, and you're complicit in the harassment of a biracial royal. The press, long known for their brutal pursuit of scoops, suddenly found themselves paralyzed. No one wanted to be the first to poke holes in the narrative. No one wanted to be accused of fueling racial hostility. But the issue wasn't race. It was transparency. And the media's decision to retreat from journalistic rigor played directly into the hands of those orchestrating the cover-up. George Clooney noticed this shift too. He had worked with journalists his entire career, navigated red carpets, faced scandals, endured gossip columns. But this was different. This wasn't about protecting a celebrity's image. It was about shielding a lie. He watched as respected media organizations ran puff pieces and recycled press releases. He watched as talk show hosts praised Meghan's post-birth glow without questioning how she looked flawless in heels just 2 days after allegedly delivering a baby. He saw magazines publish baby photos that looked more like stock images than actual documentation of a newborn's first days. And no one asked questions. Why? Because the Sussex team had mastered the media playbook. They leveraged their victim narrative to shield themselves from inquiry. They weaponized identity politics to create a no-touch zone around their version of events. And the press, afraid of the backlash, complied. It wasn't just in the UK either. American media, typically more deferential to celebrities than the British press, followed suit. Oprah Winfrey's much-publicized interview with Meghan and Harry didn't touch the subject of surrogacy at all. It was completely off-limits. Other interviews on major networks carefully avoided any discussion of Archie's birth or the medical timeline. Public relations teams made it clear this topic was taboo. One insider from a national network described the directive they received: do not ask about the birth. Keep it positive. Stay on message. It was a full-blown embargo on truth. Even alternative media outlets, blogs, and independent journalists faced unusual resistance. YouTube creators who published videos questioning the birth story found their content demonetized. Posts on forums and social media were flagged as misinformation. Algorithms began suppressing posts that contained keywords like Meghan, surrogate, or Archie birth certificate. The digital gatekeepers seemed to be cooperating in real time. And yet, behind the scenes, producers and editors whispered their doubts. Some privately admitted they believed a surrogate had been used. Some had received tips from hospital workers, seen odd records, or been approached by palace insiders. But none of them felt safe to go on the record. The silence wasn't natural. It was engineered. And that's what disturbed George Clooney more than anything else. He understood that Meghan and Harry, as new parents, deserved privacy. But privacy does not require deception. Transparency doesn't mean sacrificing dignity. And a public that funds royal security, supports royal events, and is expected to embrace royal narratives deserves honesty in return. The media didn't just fail to tell the truth. They actively protected a lie. They protected it by omission, by choosing not to investigate, not to probe, not to follow the leads they would have pursued had the subjects been anyone else. They abandoned their role as watchdogs in favor of access, popularity, and political correctness. Even as rumors grew about baby bumps folding, about missing hospital footage, about inconsistencies in the royal timeline, the press remained mute. And when George finally decided to speak, few dared to follow. He was asked to appear on several networks following his quiet disclosures. But most interviews were cut short. Segments were pulled. Questions were reframed. "They wanted me to talk about humanitarian work," he said in a private conversation. But the minute I brought up that day at the clinic, the room went cold. It became clear to him that the media had no interest in disrupting the narrative they had helped to build. The machine had already moved on, and no one wanted to be responsible for breaking it down. Still, Clooney stood firm. He didn't need the media's permission to speak the truth, and he didn't expect them to join him. But he wanted the public to know that the silence wasn't accidental. It was bought, managed, controlled. He likened the media's role to a stage crew painting a backdrop while the play continued, making sure no one saw the scaffolding holding it all up. "It's not that they didn't know," he said. "It's that they didn't want to know. There's a difference." In time, independent outlets and investigative journalists began to surface with similar claims. Whistleblowers from the Portland hospital, former security agents who had been reassigned, even a retired royal aide who confirmed off the record that there was a strategy from day one to ensure no one dug too deep. The media had become more than spectators. They were enablers. And in doing so, they betrayed the very people they were supposed to serve, the public. George Clooney's quiet rebellion wasn't just against a couple. It was against an entire system. A system that traded truth for headlines, that exchanged scrutiny for celebrity, that turned a blind eye to the inconsistencies because the alternative was too messy, too controversial, too risky. But truth doesn't care about risk. It waits. It whispers. And eventually, someone hears it.